Welcome to Grandpa and the Goddess of Poetry. I was reading earlier on a poem of that great Spanish poet, Federico García Lorca. And the more I read of that man's work, the more astonishing I find it. I'm still on a voyage of discovery with Lorca. I intend to read one of his plays soon as well, but I find his originality and his talent, his use of words, even in English translation, is absolutely quite to me, I really find it quite new and refreshing and very, very enjoyable. I'm going to read one of his poems today, which is not quite as light-hearted as some of his work. He wrote this one. It's called the Gacela of the Dark Death. A Gacela is a Spanish word for the Persian form of poem known as a ghazal, and Lorca uses that word Gacela, which also actually means gazelle in Spanish, you know, the animal that runs about the African plains, but that's another thing. When Lorca wrote this poem of the Dark Death, he was in a way foretelling his own death. He wrote it later, quite late in his life, when the Spanish Civil War had turned very, very dark and unpleasant, and I think he really was fearing for his own life. But he still uses beautiful imagery here, and I was trying to compare him. I was trying to think who I could compare him to in English language poetry, and the nearest I could get really was Dylan Thomas, who of course is very well known in the United Kingdom, English-speaking world. They have similarities, you know. They love using imagery of nature, and they like to let their sort of imagination run riot in a way, and they also have a way of talking about childhood and love and regrets and life and death that are very similar, I think. And I thought I would read, as well as Lorca's poem, I thought I would read part of Dylan Thomas's poem Fern Hill, because there are many similarities between those two poems. Dylan Thomas, of course, was a great admirer of Lorca, who was not really his contemporary. Lorca was executed in 1936, when Dylan Thomas would have been very, very young, or quite young anyway. But Dylan Thomas did admire him greatly. The two poems use very similar images. You know, they use words like apples and sea and the moon and sleep, I think. You know, they're very, very similar in some ways, but equally they're not similar. I find, in a way, Lorca is more exciting in his use of language. Dylan Thomas is absolute unmatchable in his use of words, the way he puts them together. But his actual choice of words is a lot more traditional, I think, than some of Lorca's phrases. See what you think anyway. First of all, I'm going to read Lorca's Gacela of the Dark Death. And this is quite dark in places, believe me. Here we are. I want to sleep the sleep of the apples. I want to get far away from the busyness of the cemeteries. I want to sleep the sleep of that child who longed to cut his heart open far out at sea. I don't want them to tell me again how the corpse keeps all its blood, how the decaying mouth goes on begging for water. I'd rather not hear about the torture sessions the grass arranges for, nor about how the moon does all its work before dawn with its snake-like nose. I want to sleep for half a second, a minute, a century, but I want everyone to know that I am still alive, that I have a golden manger inside my lips, that I am the little friend of the west wind, that I am the elephantine shadow of mine own tears. When it's dawn, just throw some sort of cloth over me, because I know dawn will toss fistfuls of ants at me and pour a little hard water over my shoes so that the scorpion claws of the dawn will slip off. Because I want to sleep the sleep of the apples and learn a mournful song that will clean all earth away from me. Because I want to live with that shadowy child who longed to cut his heart open far out at sea. Gosh, what an astonishing use of language that is, even in translation. Some of those images of the child that wanted to cut its heart out far at sea. Lorca was a man driven by all kinds of emotions, and it's such a tragedy that he died. You know, he was simply shot by in the Spanish Civil War by people who didn't like his the side he had taken. Such a sad end. Dylan Thomas, of course, died much too young as well, but his death was, you could say, more self-inflicted. It was out-and-out alcoholism, unfortunately, and he died of alcoholic poisoning, basically. But his poetry is very, very beautiful, and the similarities with Lorca, the man he admired so greatly, are very evident, I think. I'm going to read the first and last verses of his poem Fern Hill, which is quite a longish poem. Here we are. Here's the first verse. Now as I was young and easy under the apple boughs, about the lilting house, and happy as the grass was green, the night above the dingle starry, time let me hail and climb, golden in the heydays of his eyes, and honoured among wagons. I was prince of the apple towns, and once below a time I lordly had the trees and leaves, trail with daisies and barley down the rivers of the windfall light. So beautiful, but so many similar similes there, you know, grass and childhood and, you know, the starry night. And then the last verse of Fern Hill, here we are. Nothing I cared in the lamb-white days that time would take me up to the swallow-thronged loft by the shadow of my hand, in the moon that is always rising, nor that riding to sleep I should hear him fly with the high fields and wake to the farm forever fled from the childless land. Oh, as I was young and easy in the mercy of his means, Time held me green and dying, though I sang in my chains like the sea. Isn't it a beautiful poem? Two beautiful poems, and they both end with that same word, sea, the sea. Lorca says, the shadowy child who longed to cut his heart open far out at sea, and Dylan Thomas, his last lines are, time held me green and dying, though I sang in my chains like the sea. Two great poems, two great poets from very different backgrounds. Isn't poetry wonderful? Thanks for listening.